Hey there, welcome to LSAT Demon Daily. I'm Eric Johansson. With me is Kevin Kissinger. I am a former Demon student and currently work on video for the LSAT Demon YouTube channel and Thinking LSAT YouTube channel. That's Ben and Nathan's once a week long form podcast. Kevin is a live TA and does some behind the scenes work for the Demon site. How's it going, Kevin?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing pretty well. So if you've listened to the show, you of course know of our feelings about the law school scholarship game in general, and have also likely heard Ben and Nathan mention the phenomenon of conditional scholarships that law schools give out. Wanted to take an episode to have a conversation about conditional scholarships more generally. Maybe Kevin, you can fill us in on what conditional scholarships are.
Yeah, conditional scholarships are, in a general sense, a scholarship offered by a law school on a specific condition, such as maintaining a specific grade point average or maintaining a specific rank in your class. So, for example, a law school could say, here, you get a $30,000 a year scholarship, but you have to have a 3.8 GPA at the end of your 1L year to keep that scholarship. So if you get a 3.79 uh, after your 1L year, you lose that scholarship because you didn't meet the merit-based requirement set by the law school. And we'll talk about more about what that means in a little bit, but it's you
Right.
got to be careful.
Yeah, I think there is likely an underappreciation of what a risky thing it is to enter into a conditional scholarship, because, anybody going into law school, of course, wants to believe, well, I'm going to work super hard and be at the top of my class, so I'm not going to lose this. But the fact is that literally everybody going into law school believes that they're going to work super hard and be at the top of their class, and you're going into a competition with a bunch of killers. And yeah, I think you need to have an appropriate fear for your ability to lose a conditional scholarship and not assume any exceptionalism
Yeah.
on your part. So that's just basically the ground truth advice is avoid conditional scholarships if you can.
Yes.
Kevin, where would you go to find out more about conditional scholarships at the schools that you're considering?
Well, we have you can go to the 509 reports. They have a lot of detailed information that breaks down how many scholarships they offer, how many people lose their scholarship at the end of the year, the attrition rates, stuff like that. There's also lawtransparency.com, if I'm correct.
Mm-hmm.
And they, under their conditional scholarships tab, they have pretty neat sort of graph and table format where they show the conditional scholarship numbers from the past few years.
Yeah, that's lawschooltransparency.com, which I would recommend anyone who's considering applying to law school to check out. And we can leave a link to that in the show notes for this episode. I will give a shout out to the LSAT Demon Scholarship Estimator, which you can find at lsatdemon.com/scholarships. I will use a school that's local to me as an example. UC Hastings. If I go to the Scholarship Estimator and do a search for Hastings, right there in line is a link to the PDF of their 509 report. And if I open that up and scroll down to page 3, there's a section on conditional scholarships for the year 2020 and 2021. And it will show for each of the 3 years of students, the total number of students who entered within a conditional scholarship and the number of those students who had their conditional scholarship reduced or eliminated. And then, yeah, going back to the law school transparency page that you mentioned, it shows an interesting trend, which is generally a decline in both the total number of conditional scholarships offered and also the percentage of conditional scholarships revoked over the last decade or so. And that's maybe you can talk about what you're seeing there.
Yeah, so it's a bit of a gradual decline, which is slightly surprising, mostly because law schools try to get as much money as they can from each of their matriculants. But the most notable drop in conditional scholarships actually came in 2019, 2020, due to the coronavirus pandemic, most likely. I mean, we could speculate all we want on why that dropped, but there are a couple different factors, such as um, going remote and people having to do pass fail for their grades. So it's harder to figure out where you fall in the grade curve, or people just dropping out of law school in general. Maybe a lot of people with these conditional scholarships couldn't afford it or had to go back home to help their families for whatever reason. So, I mean, you can like I said, you can speculate all you want, but there just is a noticeable drop in 2019. I think, what do they have here?
Yeah, I was going to
40.
say to put these numbers in concrete terms, before 2019, you were looking at the last several years of conditional scholarships offered. About a quarter, maybe slightly over 25% of those scholarships were revoked year over year. In 2019, that dropped to only 9.6% of students with conditional scholarships losing those scholarships. And
I'd
like
like
you
to.
said, I would attribute that mostly to the fact that with remote learning came a shift on a lot of schools' parts to pass fail grading, which would
Mhm.
throw up the GPA basis for their revoking conditional scholarships.
Yeah, I'd like to think it's out of the goodness of their hearts, but probably not.
Yeah. Now, one thing that Law School Transparency on this very useful page does not have is the most recent year's numbers. And it was interesting to me to figure out whether this downturn was going to last as we emerged from the worst of the pandemic and schools came back online for in person learning, or whether we would see an uptick back towards the pre pandemic numbers. And I think it's not surprising to show that this latest ABA report's numbers do, in fact, show that conditional scholarships are kind of returning to their pre pandemic phase.
Yep, yeah. Hashtag we did the math. We figured out a little bit of the general trend, trying to fill this gap that the website has. And I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if the website actually goes back and updates it. But yeah, it just shows that the conditional scholarships are back. They're coming back into the fold. They're on the rise. So just again, we want to reiterate, you got to be careful when reading the fine print on your scholarships, because we
Yeah,
want to make sure that you don't get caught in this conditional scholarship scheme where you could have it for 1 year and then lose it because you didn't meet the merit requirement.
absolutely. Of the, to put again some solid numbers behind that, the average for the 1L class, which entered in 2020, the percentage of conditional scholarships in that 1L class that were reduced or eliminated was back up to 23.5%, which is approaching what it was before the pandemic.
Consistent with the
So,
average. Yeah.
yep. And look, that's just an average across all of the schools. It's going to vary dramatically from school to school. You'll find a number where none of the conditional scholarships were eliminated. If it the case of some schools that only offer a handful of conditional scholarships, in some cases, everyone has held on to those. On the other hand, if I resort this handy spreadsheet that we've created for ourselves, and by by this percentage, at the top is University of Arkansas Little Rock, which eliminated 90% of its conditional scholarships this year.
That's astounding that they, first of all, astounding that they, we also have, it says 89 when 1Ls entered and 80 were eliminated. So that's the hard numbers there. But it's astounding that they offer that many in the first place and then reduce that many afterwards. It's just, it's very scary and very dangerous.
Yeah. How do you see? I know, Kevin, you've been doing a lot of work looking into scholarship data generally. How do you see all of this fitting with the broader trends that you've seen with law school conditional scholarships?
Yeah, so in general, the 509 reports are indicating that scholarships are up, and that might just be because enrollment is up too. So it's hard to say exactly if law schools are just giving out more coupons or if there's just more students who accepted these offers throughout the past year. So it's very possible that these conditional scholarships are just there's more students, therefore there's more scholarships that are conditional, or if it's just they're offering more conditional scholarships in general, regardless of the enrollment uptick. So, um, regardless of how you look at it, there are more conditional scholarships being offered, and there are more students at these schools who are getting scholarships. So it wouldn't be too far of a stretch to say that there are some students who are getting conditional scholarships more than in previous years.
Yeah. Why do you think schools give out these conditional scholarships?
Well, I mean, if I got an email from a law school saying, "Hey, congratulations, you get a $30,000 scholarship to some place," for some students who aren't super aware of the law school game, they might think, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing! I'm getting $30,000 to go to school. That's fantastic." And then they don't read the fine print and realize, "Oh, I could lose it after my first year." It's just a bigger part of the scammership law school scholarships game, and law schools are trying to get as much money as they can out of everybody. And if law schools are able to, offer all these scholarships and just take them away, you're already committed to this law school for a year. You got for your first year paid for a little bit, and then are you going to ride the whole thing through all the way for your second and third years? It's tough to say.
Yeah. I mean, that's really a case of that last point you made is really a case of the sunk cost. I think there are a lot of external factors that are going to push you to complete what you started, right?
Yeah,
If you get through your first year of school with some amount of scholarship and then have that revoked, it it's human nature to think, well, I can't turn back now. I've already committed this much time and energy into law school. Why don't I just see it through? And you're not the only one who's going to be telling yourself that. You're probably going to have friends and family and classmates and people at the school telling you the same thing. When in fact, what you stand to lose from paying full freight at this school for the next 2 years is going to be way more than what you lost from that first year. And additionally, potentially catastrophic given what your career outcomes might be.
yeah,
To put it bluntly, if you're in a position where you lost your conditional scholarship because you're below the median GPA for this school, you know, your career outcomes and your opportunities to pay off what could be $200,000, $300,000 worth of debt are not great.
yeah. It's a very, very risky and dangerous venture to go into. And I think you might have touched on this earlier. A lot of these schools are pretty low in the rankings. They're not your really well established law schools for the most part.
Yeah.
And so, the career outcomes from these schools, you got to be really careful. You don't know uh, what you're going to get when you graduate. And if you have, like you said, this 200,000, $300,000 debt in tow, what are you going to do? What are you going to do if you don't have a job lined up?
Yeah.
So,
It is true that, as you mentioned, I think the highest ranked school, at least as this past year, that offered conditional scholarships was BYU at around 30. But they really aren't super common until you get down in the 50s and 60s. You don't see top ranked schools giving conditional scholarships. They're mostly the domain of the lower ranked schools. And I believe it's just over 40% of all schools that offer them. I did want to mention also on the topic of why these conditional scholarships exist, and there's more that you can speculate regarding how it fits into the equation of how a school values you as an investment, and whether they already got what they needed out of you from your having attended the first year, and so then they feel comfortable taking your scholarship away. I think there is evidence to suggest that it's they rely in order to balance their budgets on a certain amount of that scholarship money coming back and on retaining a large number of the students whose scholarships they revoked and who will now be paying the full cost of tuition.
Yeah, they draw you in and trick you, and
Yeah.
that's the trap. You don't want to step in that bear trap and get
And
caught.
in
So
fact, there was, you got an email recently, Kevin, which
I
would
did,
suggest that
yeah.
this is true. I wonder if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, so Willamette sent. I get a bunch of unsolicited emails because, like a lot of listeners, I'm applying to law school in the near future. So, um, I got an email from Willamette that was talking about how they're getting rid of conditional scholarships in their entirety. And so it says, for example, in their press release that they give out, they are going to terminate conditional scholarships for future admitted students. All College of Law awards going forward will be renewable on the basis of academic good standing. And they talk about how they're going to replace these conditional scholarships with durable awards, such as those that are renewable as long as a student maintains academic good standing, which I think they kind of mentioned earlier at the top of the
Mm-hmm.
press release. But they say that this will go into effect immediately for all incoming students who are admitted and join the class of 2025. So
Yeah. I
interesting.
I think the key point here in this press release is a statement from the College of Law Dean, Brian Galini, where he says the conditional scholarship system has been an important part of our budgetary model in the past.
That's a scary sentence.
Well, I think it makes sense. And look, we don't have, with the 509 reports, data that's granular enough to be able to say whether the people who lose their scholarships are then leaving school. But I think it's clear that the schools, for the reasons that we laid out earlier, can expect plenty of these students whose scholarships get revoked to stick around and pay full cost. And the closest thing that I've come up with for confirming that is to look at both attrition in relation to these conditional scholarship numbers. And for this past year, which seem fairly representative of years past, except for the COVID year, if you look at the total number of students who left the college or who left the school as a percentage of the total number of conditional scholarships that were eliminated, it's only 50%. So at most, 50% of the students who lost their scholarships would have left as a result of it. So that's all just extra money in the school's pocket.
Yeah, and that's a very generous figure in understanding that conditional scholarship estimation. So it's again, as we said earlier, you just have to be careful when accepting a scholarship. And again, we
Yeah.
we always say don't pay for law school. A lot of these conditional scholarships are partial scholarships that don't cover all of tuition. So you shouldn't be accepting it in the first place and going to a different school.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, well said. I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Final advice, we'll reiterate, be extremely careful with these conditional scholarships. As a rule of thumb, don't accept one. If you do accept one, only do so with a commitment to leave school if you lose that scholarship. And do your research by checking out the school's 509 reports, which you can find at lsatdemon.com/scholarships. Kevin, thanks so much for joining me. This was a great conversation. If
yep.
you have anything to share about this, if you have your own experience with conditional scholarships, be sure to email daily@lsatdemon.com. Do the same if you just want to ask us a question or share some LSAT or law school admissions news. Thanks for listening.